6 months later, the Riverside Community Pool had become something different. The lap lanes were busier now. Not overwhelmingly so, but noticeably. Sophie's grandfather came 3 times a week, along with 4 other seniors who'd previously been too intimidated to try. There was a woman named Dorothy who came with her teenage granddaughter. Dorothy was 78 and had breast cancer survivor scars on her chest, and she swam with a grace and power that made the younger adults stop and watch. A man named James, 74, came with his husband. An unmarried woman named Rita, 82, who'd learned to swim in adulthood and came now like a person reclaiming something stolen from her. A younger man, only 63, who'd suffered a stroke and used the pool as part of his recovery. The afternoon lap times had become an informal senior swim hour, not mandated by the HOA but understood by everyone. That's when the older people came. And something remarkable had happened as a result. The other users had stopped seeing age as a liability and started seeing it as presence, as evidence that a body could endure, as proof that there was more than one way to move through the world. Karen Hutchins came Tuesday and Thursday evenings after her therapy sessions. She and Marcus had never become friends. Some things couldn't be repaired that way. But they'd reached an understanding. They'd exchanged apologies that mattered, and they'd both been changed by the conflict they'd created and survived. It was Derek who approached Marcus one Wednesday morning with the proposal. "We're starting a senior swim program," Derek said, "specifically for low-impact exercise for people dealing with chronic conditions. We want you to be the community representative, to help design it, to be part of the leadership." Marcus had initially said no. He didn't want to be the face of anything. He just wanted to swim, but Sophie had convinced him. Sophie had argued that his experience, the conflict, the victory, the reconciliation, had meaning only if he let it be useful to other people. So he said yes. The program launched in September. It started with 12 participants. By December, there were 37. There were swimming instructors now, specifically trained in age-appropriate techniques. There was medical supervision, not from insurance companies trying to protect themselves, but from an actual nurse practitioner who understood what aging bodies needed. And there was Marcus, leading warm-ups, talking about his journey, helping people understand that their age was not a liability to apologize for. The first day the program really clicked was when all the participants got in the water at the same time. It was early October, a Saturday morning, and the entire lap section was filled with people ranging in age from 62 to 87. All of them moving, all of them pushing themselves, all of them taking up space. An older woman named Diane, who had severe osteoarthritis, swam her first full lap without stopping. She cried when she touched the wall. A man named Richard, recovering from prostate cancer treatment, did 10 consecutive minutes of water walking. Patricia, the board president, was there watching, and even she was crying. Marcus stood on the pool deck, watching all these people who'd been invisible before, who'd accepted their invisibility as the cost of aging, suddenly being seen, being acknowledged, being allowed to take up space. Sophie approached him with her phone. "They want you to do an interview," she said. "Local news. They want to do a story about the program." Marcus looked at her. Then he looked at the water. Then he looked at all these people taking up space. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." The interview aired on a Thursday evening in October. Marcus sat across from the news anchor, a woman named Keisha who was warm and genuinely interested, and told the story. Not the legal victory, not the fight with the HOA or the letter from the attorney. He told the real story, the story of being told you don't belong and the choice to believe that wasn't true. "There was this moment," Marcus said to the camera, "where I could have accepted it. Where I could have agreed that maybe I was too old to be there, that maybe I should gracefully exit and let the younger people have the space. But I had this thought, What if everyone who'd ever felt invisible just accepted it? What if we all just stepped back? He paused. So I didn't. And it turns out, when you don't accept it, when you insist on taking up space, it changes things. Not just for you, but for everyone who was waiting for someone to do that first. That video went viral. Not the kind of viral that breaks the internet, but the kind that matters. It was shared in senior communities. It was shown in community centers. It sparked conversations in HOAs across the nation about accessibility and age and what it meant to truly welcome people. But what Marcus cared about most happened locally. 2 weeks after the interview aired, the neighborhood changed again. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Mothers who'd been giving him cold shoulders started acknowledging him. An older couple who'd been too intimidated to join the pool after seeing the conflict now enrolled. The mailman, who was 74 himself, mentioned that he'd been thinking about getting back into swimming. And then, one morning in early November, Karen appeared at the edge of the pool where Marcus was doing his warm-up laps. "I want to help with the program," she said. Marcus stopped. He looked up at her, water dripping from his face. "I've been thinking about what I did," Karen continued, "and I realized something. I wasn't just scared about people dying at the pool. I was scared about becoming invisible. I was scared that if I got older, people would start deciding that I didn't belong anywhere. And instead of facing that fear, I projected it onto you. I made you the problem so I wouldn't have to look at my own stuff." "The therapy is helping?" Marcus asked gently. "Yeah," Karen said. "Actually, it is. And I want to do something with that. I want to help make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. I want to volunteer with the program." Marcus considered this. He thought about how easily he could say no. How much simpler his life would be without her presence. But he also thought about forgiveness, and about how real forgiveness wasn't forgetting or erasing the harm. It was acknowledging it and choosing to move forward anyway. "Okay," he said. "We could use help with scheduling and sign-ups. You're organized." Karen smiled. It was a real smile, not a forced one. By the time November came around, the program was running like a well-oiled machine. Marcus and Karen worked together on scheduling. Derek handled the logistics. Sophie was the lead instructor. Patricia ensured HOA support and resources. There were 43 participants now. And on the final Saturday morning of the program's first cycle, they all got in the water together. This time, when Marcus actually dove in, not just waded in from the shallow end, he came up to absolute silence. He looked around. All the older swimmers were watching him. Then they began to clap. It was the clap that did it. The recognition. The acknowledgement that he had done something worth doing. That he had taken what was meant to break him and turned it into something that could heal others. He swam a lap underwater, the longest he'd done in months. When he came up, he wasn't alone. 4 other people dove in beside him, then 5 more. Then the entire pool was filled with people, all of them in motion, all of them taking up space, all of them refusing to be invisible. Marcus floated on his back and looked up at the sky. It was perfect. The November sun was soft but still warm. The water held him up, and all around him, people were moving. He thought about Karen, in therapy, learning to face her fears. He thought about Sophie's grandfather, who told his family that he finally felt like he mattered again. He thought about Diane, who'd cried when she swam her first lap. He thought about Richard, proving to himself that his body could still do things. He thought about all the people he'd never meet, who would see that interview and understand that they didn't have to accept invisibility. And he thought about the woman who'd told him he was too old for the pool. She was crying now, but not from shame. She was in the water, too, learning to swim as an act of penance and rebirth, understanding for the first time in her life that aging didn't mean disappearing. The morning started like any other Tuesday in Oak Ridge Estates. Manicured lawns, architectural consistency, and Patricia Vance conducting her weekly neighborhood inspection like a general surveying conquered territory. She'd held the HOA presidency for 7 years running, and in those 7 years, not a single homeowner had successfully challenged her on a violation notice. Her record was spotless. Her reign was absolute. Patricia moved down Maple Street in her white Mercedes SUV, her eyes sharp behind designer sunglasses, cataloging every microscopic infraction. A mailbox post, slightly faded, a hedge trimmed unevenly, a garden gnome someone had foolishly believed added character to their front lawn. The gnome had been gone by sunset the next day. She turned onto Birch Lane and saw it immediately. The 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray sat in Marcus Webb's driveway like a beautiful scar in her perfect neighborhood. It was parked perpendicular to the garage, its ruby-red paint gleaming even under the overcast morning sky, its long hood and aggressive profile completely at odds with every other vehicle on the street. A carefully curated collection of sensible SUVs, luxury sedans, and electric hybrids. Patricia's jaw tightened. She'd noticed the car 2 weeks ago when it first appeared, but she'd been busy with the spring violation notices. Now it had been sitting there, unmoved, a constant reproach to everything she'd worked to maintain. She pulled over and consulted her leather-bound HOA violation handbook. Section 7, paragraph C. All vehicles must be kept in working condition and parked within the confines of approved structures. Antique or classic vehicles may be displayed only with prior written approval from the HOA board. Her lips curved into a thin smile. Marcus Webb had never submitted an application. She'd checked the files twice yesterday, once she'd decided to make this her focus. Patricia pulled into Webb's driveway and got out of her car, her heels clicking sharply against the asphalt. The Corvette was even more offensive up close. Too loud, too attention-seeking, too utterly disinterested in blending in. She circled it slowly, taking photographs with her phone, documenting every angle. The paint was pristine. The chrome was flawless. The interior, visible through the window, looked like it had been restored by a professional. Leather seats, restored dashboard, nothing out of place. "Can I help you?" Patricia turned to find Marcus Webb standing in his open garage, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching her with an expression that was polite but firmly contained. He was a man in his mid-60s, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd lived a life that required genuine emotion, not just performed reactions. He wore paint-stained jeans and a faded college sweatshirt. He looked, Patricia thought with distaste, like a contractor. "Marcus!" She turned to face him fully, clipboard already in hand. "I'm glad I caught you. We need to discuss your vehicle." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. He didn't say anything, just waited, watching her with dark eyes that didn't reflect any anxiety. "This car," Patricia continued, gesturing at the Corvette with the certainty of someone who had never been questioned, "has been parked in your driveway for 2 weeks without prior HOA approval. The HOA bylaws are very clear. Classic vehicles require explicit board authorization. I'm assuming you haven't filed the necessary paperwork?" "I haven't." Marcus's voice was calm, almost bored. "Is this going to be a problem?" The nonchalance was infuriating. Patricia had come to expect apologies, or at least explanations. Some people actually tried to explain themselves as if they had any right to their own perspective. "It's already a problem, Marcus. It's been a problem for 14 days. She pulled out a pre-printed violation notice and began filling it in. "I'm going to need you to either park this vehicle in your garage or submit an approved application to the HOA board within 10 days. If you don't, we'll have no choice but to pursue enforcement through the Architectural Review Committee." "And what does that mean?" "Exactly?" Marcus asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew. "It means," Patricia said, drawing out each word with satisfaction, "we can compel you to remove the vehicle or face fines, substantial fines. Eventually, if you refuse, we can file a lien against your property." The Corvette seemed to gleam in the pale morning light, almost mockingly, as Patricia handed him the violation notice. Marcus took it without looking at it, his attention still on her. "And if I don't take it down?" he asked quietly. "If I just refuse?" Patricia smiled. She loved when they asked this question. It made what came next so much clearer, so much easier to justify. Then, Marcus, I have the authority to call a towing company and have it removed for you. At your expense, of course. It's all in the bylaws. Section 12, paragraph F. You agreed to this when you bought the property. For the first time, something shifted in Marcus's expression. A tightening around the eyes, a slight clenching of his jaw. But his voice remained level when he spoke. Don't do that, Patricia. It wasn't quite a threat, and it wasn't quite a plea. It was something in between that she couldn't quite categorize, and that uncertainty made her double down. She'd learned long ago that showing any hesitation was a sign of weakness that people would exploit. You have 10 days, Patricia said, turning back to her car. After that, this becomes official board business. She didn't look back as she drove away, though she checked her mirror obsessively, watching the Corvette recede behind her. In her side mirror, she saw Marcus still standing in his garage. The violation notice in one hand, his coffee cup in the other, looking at the car like it was the most precious thing he owned. It should have made her feel better. It didn't quite. There was something about the way he'd looked at her that made the small hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Not fear, exactly, but a premonition. A sense that she'd just pulled a thread she shouldn't have pulled, and that the sweater she was unraveling might turn out to be holding something together. Patricia pushed the thought away. She was Patricia Vance. She didn't second-guess herself. She never had. She was still thinking about it when she got home to her own house, an immaculate 4-bedroom colonial with landscaping that won architectural awards. She poured herself a glass of wine at 11 in the morning, something she rarely did, and tried to focus on her afternoon meeting with the violation committee. But her mind kept circling back to that car, to the way Marcus's eyes had looked, to the strange weight of his voice when he'd said, "Don't do that." She told herself she was being silly. This was routine. This was what she did. And after 10 days, when Marcus inevitably capitulated or faced enforcement, everything would go back to normal. Back to her version of perfect, back to control. Marcus didn't apply for HOA approval. On day 5, Patricia sent an email reminding him of the deadline. On day 8, she had sent a certified letter. On day 10, precisely at 5:47 p.m., Marcus received a phone call from a representative of East Side Towing, informing him they'd be collecting the Corvette the following morning at 8 a.m. He didn't argue with the representative. He simply asked what time they'd be arriving and hung up. At 7:45 a.m. on the 11th day, every neighbor on Birch Lane heard the truck before they saw it. The massive flatbed tow truck rumbled slowly down the street, its engine aggressive and industrial, its presence a violent disruption to the soft morning sounds of birds and distant traffic. It pulled deliberately into Marcus's driveway, reversing with mechanical precision until it was positioned perfectly to winch up the Corvette. Patricia watched from her front window, one hand on her coffee mug, satisfaction spreading through her chest like warmth. She'd done it. She'd enforced the rule, maintained the standard, proven that no one could defy the HOA on her watch. The tow truck operator was a man in his 50s with a weathered face and a neck tattoo. He climbed out of the cab and began setting up the winch system, methodical and professional. He didn't notice the quiet gathering of neighbors along the street. By 7:55, there were at least a dozen people standing in their yards, watching silently. Then Marcus came out of his house. He was dressed for the occasion, not casually, as he had been during their last interaction, but formally. He wore a pressed white button-down shirt and dark slacks. His silver hair was combed back. He looked, Patricia thought with a strange flutter of unease, like he was attending a funeral. He walked slowly to the tow truck operator and had a brief conversation Patricia couldn't quite hear, though she could see money changing hands. The operator nodded, seemed to say something placating, and then climbed back into the cab. Patricia's satisfaction faltered. She'd expected Marcus to argue, to plead, to try to negotiate. Instead, he just stood beside the Corvette, one hand resting on its hood, and watched as the winch began to lower its mechanical arm. What happened next occurred in the space between seconds, so fast that everyone on the street later swore they saw something different, though the essential facts remained the same. As the winch operator positioned the arm, Marcus pulled a folder from inside his pressed shirt. Large, manila, official-looking. He handed it to the tow operator with the kind of deliberate ceremony that suggested every eye watching, including Patricia's from behind her kitchen window was exactly where he wanted it to be. The operator took the folder and opened it. His face went still. Then he looked back at Marcus, then back at the folder, then slowly up at the open windows where neighbors were still watching. He said something into his radio. Then, moving carefully like a man who'd just realized he was standing in a minefield, he lowered the mechanical arm back down, releasing the Corvette without ever actually winching it. "What the?" Patricia set down her coffee mug hard enough to slosh it across her counter. She grabbed her phone and dialed the towing company directly. East Side Towing. "This is Roger speaking," a woman's voice answered. "This is Patricia Vance from Oak Ridge Estates HOA. I need to know why your operator isn't collecting the Webb vehicle." There was a pause, a very long pause. "Ms. Vance, I'm looking at the documentation your HOA provided, and I'm looking at what Mr. Webb just showed us. I think there's been a misunderstanding about the vehicle in question." "What do you mean, a misunderstanding?" "He has 10 days to get it off his driveway. The time has passed. It's now the HOA's property to dispose of." "Ma'am, I don't think that's accurate. This vehicle is registered to a historical preservation foundation. The documentation Mr. Webb has includes—" Another pause. Patricia could hear papers rustling. "Includes provisional state historical landmark designation. You can't tow a landmark vehicle from private property without state historical review. That's federal law, ma'am, or close to it anyway. My dispatcher is calling our attorney right now." Patricia felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. "That's impossible," she said, but the words felt hollow even as she said them. "I'm really sorry, Ms. Vance. We're going to have to cancel this collection. I'd recommend you contact the State Historical Preservation Office if there's a dispute about the vehicle's designation." The operator hung up. Patricia stood in her kitchen holding her phone, listening to the dial tone while in the driveway of a modest colonial a quarter-mile away. Her neighbors watched Marcus Webb place one hand on the Corvette's hood and smile for the first time in 11 days. By 8:30 a.m., the video was already on the neighborhood's private Facebook group. By 9 a.m., the local news was calling Marcus for a statement. By 10 a.m., Patricia's phone was ringing off the hook with neighbors asking why the HOA was apparently involved in some kind of war with a historical preservation foundation. By 11 a.m., Patricia sat in her office, a converted bedroom in the back of her house that she kept as pristine as her life, and read the email her lawyer had just sent. "Patricia, I've reviewed the documentation the State Historical Preservation Office provided regarding Marcus Webb's 1967 Corvette. The vehicle in question was indeed granted provisional historical landmark status 6 months ago, pending final authorization. The designation is legitimate, and the HOA's attempt to compel removal through standard violation procedures may constitute harassment of protected property. More concerning, Webb has documentation showing he submitted a formal notification to the HOA board regarding the vehicle's status approximately 10 days before you issued the violation notice. This notification appears to have been submitted to the HOA office email. I'm not certain how this wasn't processed, but it may result in significant liability for the HOA. We should probably talk." Patricia's hands were shaking. She opened her email archives and searched for anything from Marcus with the subject line, "Historical Designation." There, 4 pages of documentation forwarded to the HOA board email on the exact day. Marcus had said, in that strange, controlled voice, "Don't do that." She'd never checked that email. She'd given responsibility for monitoring it to her vice president, Karen Hartley. Karen, who had apparently never opened the attachment Marcus had sent. Patricia dialed Karen's number. It rang 4 times before Karen picked up, her voice tight and defensive before Patricia had even spoken. "I know why you're calling," Karen said. "I know about Webb's email. I didn't see it come through. The spam filter must have—" "Did you check the spam folder?" Patricia's voice was ice. No, I didn't think to." "So you didn't actually monitor the board email?" Patricia said slowly. "You just didn't check it at all." Patricia, I've been dealing with the budget committee and the sidewalk repairs, and you were responsible for one thing, Karen. One thing. And you didn't do it, Patricia hung up. She sat in her pristine office, surrounded by the architectural awards and the photos of communities she'd successfully managed, and felt her perfect record crack down the middle like ice on a spring river. By 2 p.m., Marcus gave an interview to the local news. He stood beside his Corvette, one hand resting on its hood exactly as he had with the tow truck, and spoke in that calm, measured way of his that apparently concealed the patience of someone playing a very long game. I wanted to work within the system, he told the reporter. I notified the HOA properly. I followed every procedure. When they continued to pursue this, I made sure I had documentation. This car is important to more than just me. It deserves to be protected. The reporter asked what the car meant to him, and Marcus's expression shifted, not dramatically but noticeably. Something like grief passed across his face, ancient and well-worn. It's the only thing I have left from a very important time in my life, he said simply. I'm just grateful I could protect it. That evening, Patricia sat in her living room surrounded by her awards and watched her neighborhood turn against her. The Facebook group erupted. The sympathetic posts for Marcus multiplied. The critical posts about Patricia's aggressive HOA policies and power-hungry management started appearing with alarming frequency. Someone posted a link to 3 years of Patricia's violation notices, highlighting the ones that had been purely aesthetic or technically stretching the rules. By midnight, the headline on the local news website read, Local HOA President Attempts to Remove Historic Landmark Vehicle, Battles, Historical Preservation Foundation. They made her look like a villain, Patricia thought distantly. They deliberately framed it in the worst possible light, ignored her legitimate authority, focused only on the sympathetic narrative. They didn't understand that rules existed for a reason, that chaos resulted from allowing exceptions, that the HOA existed to maintain standards, and those standards required enforcement. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd simply done her job. And yet, as she lay in bed that night listening to the wind in the trees outside her window, Patricia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd fundamentally misunderstood something about the situation, something about the way Marcus had looked at her, something about the patient inevitability of his actions. It was as if he'd known exactly what she would do and had been waiting for her to do it. The story spread faster than Patricia could contain it. By Wednesday, local news outlets were running features on classic car preservation and community rights, with Marcus's Corvette as the centerpiece. By Thursday, the State Historical Preservation Office had confirmed the vehicle's provisional landmark status. And by Friday, Patricia's phone had stopped ringing because every important person in her life had already hung up on her at least once. The first crack came from the HOA board itself. Patricia sat in the emergency board meeting she'd called, facing 5 people whose faces reflected everything from disappointment to outright contempt. Margaret Chen, the treasurer, spoke first. The HOA's attorney sent a preliminary assessment of our liability, Margaret said, laying a document on the table. The potential exposure from pursuing this violation against a historically designated vehicle is substantial. We're talking potential lawsuit territory. But the violation was legitimate before the designation was finalized, Patricia protested, even as her stomach twisted at the desperation in her own voice. The car was not properly parked. According to Webb's documentation, interrupted David Torres, the newest board member, he notified us of the designation status. That's in writing. That's in our email system, which your vice president, Karen, apparently never processed. So we proceeded with violation procedures against a vehicle we should have known was protected. That's not legitimate. That's negligent. I was following protocol, Patricia said. The words sounded weak even to her. I didn't receive the notification. You didn't check to see if it had been received, Margaret corrected, not unkindly. You delegated that responsibility and then didn't verify it was being handled. That's a management failure, Patricia. That's on you. Patricia's hands clenched in her lap. So what are you suggesting? The 5 board members exchanged glances. Richard Michaels, the board secretary, shifted uncomfortably. We think, he said carefully, It might be prudent for you to step down as president. Just temporarily, until the situation settles. Someone else can lead the response to this situation. Apologize to Webb if necessary. Work with the Preservation Office to develop policy around historical designations. You want me to resign? Patricia said flatly. We want to protect the HOA, Margaret said. We want to show the community that we take this seriously. And right now, your continued leadership is making that difficult. You're the face of what happened. Fairly or unfairly, the community is looking at you and seeing someone who didn't follow procedure, didn't listen to proper notification, and pursued a resident aggressively anyway. That's not fair, Patricia heard herself say. No, Margaret agreed. But it's true. And sometimes those are the same thing. Patricia walked out of the meeting with her resignation accepted and her authority transferred to Margaret within 20 minutes. 7 years of presidency, gone. 20 years of HOA management experience, discredited. Her perfect record, shattered. She drove around for hours after that, moving through the streets of Oak Ridge Estates in a kind of numb autopilot. Everything looked the same. The manicured lawns, the consistent architecture, the careful conformity she'd worked so hard to maintain. But now, when she looked at the neighborhood, she saw only fragility. She saw how thin the veneer of control actually was, how quickly order could be disrupted. At some point, she found herself parked on Birch Lane, staring at the Corvette in Marcus's driveway. It sat in the afternoon light like a trophy. Like evidence. She got out of her car and walked toward it before she could talk herself out of it, her heels clicking sharply against the asphalt, just as they had when she'd first documented its existence. Marcus came out of his garage before she reached the car, moving with that same unhurried pace that somehow conveyed complete awareness. Patricia, he said, not quite as a greeting, more as an acknowledgement of fact. I lost my position, Patricia said, not sure why she was telling him this, not sure why she was here at all. The HOA board removed me as president because of this situation. I know, Marcus said. He was holding a rag, the kind people use to polish cars. It was on the neighborhood email chain. Karen forwarded it to everyone. Patricia felt her face burn. I didn't know about your notification because my vice president didn't process it correctly. I made a decision based on incomplete information. Yes, Marcus agreed simply. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded sad, if anything. Tired. So this was all just to make me look bad, Patricia said. To humiliate me. To prove I couldn't push you around. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the Corvette, and his expression softened in a way that made Patricia suddenly very aware that there was something about this car that she'd fundamentally misunderstood. Come here, Marcus said. He walked over to the car and opened the driver's side door. Look at the registration. Patricia hesitated, then leaned in. The registration was visible on the dashboard, faded and laminated. The car was registered to Marcus Webb and Eleanor Webb, joint tenancy. Eleanor's my wife, Marcus said quietly. Was my wife. She passed away 2 years ago. She bought this car in 1968, right after we got married. It was her dream car. She worked 3 jobs to help save up for it, and I restored it myself in our garage when we were young. Patricia didn't move, didn't speak. When Eleanor died, the only thing I wanted was to keep this car exactly as she had loved it. Not to drive it. I haven't driven it in 15 years. Just to keep it, to sit with it, to remember her in it. Marcus's voice was steady, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. And then you decided it was an eyesore that needed to be removed from your perfect neighborhood. Marcus, I didn't know. I know you didn't know, he said. And there was no anger in his voice, which somehow made it worse. That's the point. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't try to understand. You just assumed that your vision of what a neighborhood should be was more important than my connection to the person I loved most in this world. I was trying to maintain standards, Patricia whispered. Standards for what? Marcus asked. For whom? Who benefits when the thing that was most important to me is turned into yard waste because it doesn't match the aesthetic you've decided is acceptable? Patricia had no answer. I sent that documentation to your HOA because I hoped it would stop this before it had to go further, Marcus continued. I hoped you'd see that I was trying to work within the system, that I was trying to preserve something that mattered. But when your vice president didn't read my email and you didn't verify that she had, I realized that no amount of communication would matter. You'd already decided what the right answer was, so I made sure I could protect what was mine. By making me look foolish, Patricia said. By existing with dignity, Marcus corrected. By refusing to allow someone else's idea of perfection to destroy something sacred. Everything else, the publicity, the embarrassment, the way the community turned against you, that was just what happened when the truth came out. I didn't orchestrate that. The truth did. Patricia stood there, one hand on the car door, and felt something shift inside her. It was the same sensation as when a bone that's been set wrong finally has to be broken again to heal properly. Painful, destabilizing, necessary. I'm sorry, she said. It was inadequate. It was the bare minimum. But it was the first true thing she'd said in days. Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging it, though his expression didn't change. I think I need to be alone with Eleanor for a while, he said. But thank you for coming. Thank you for saying that. Patricia turned and walked back to her car. She didn't look back. She drove home and sat in her pristine living room surrounded by her awards, and for the first time in 7 years, she considered whether the life she'd built was actually the life she wanted. The answer, when it came, terrified her. The apology Patricia issued came the following Monday. She wrote it carefully, deliberately, for the neighborhood email list and the local news. She acknowledged the HOA's failure to properly process Marcus's notification. She resigned from the HOA board permanently, not just temporarily. She publicly stated that the Corvette should never have been subject to violation procedures. She recommended the HOA develop a new policy, specifically regarding historically designated vehicles, and promised to support Marcus in his efforts to work with the State Historical Preservation Office. The neighborhood received it with confusion initially, then gradually shifting towards something resembling approval. A few neighbors thanked her for stepping up and taking responsibility. Most simply stopped mentioning her at all. Marcus, for his part, seemed to fade back into his life with the same quiet deliberation with which he'd entered Patricia's awareness. He didn't attend HOA meetings. He didn't organize community events or give interviews. He simply existed in his house on Birch Lane with his restored Corvette, and the neighborhood gradually absorbed this new reality into its collective consciousness, the way neighborhoods do. It was 4 weeks after the tow truck incident that Patricia's doorbell rang on a Tuesday evening. She opened it to find Marcus standing on her porch, wearing his paint-stained jeans and college sweatshirt again, holding a manila folder that looked identical to the one he'd shown the tow truck operator. "May I come in?" he asked. Patricia's first instinct was to say no, to protect whatever remained of her privacy and dignity. But she'd been trying for the past month to do the right things, to actually consider the perspectives of others instead of simply imposing her own. So she stepped back and let him inside. They sat in her living room, surrounded by her architectural awards, and Marcus opened the folder. "There's something I need to show you," he said. "Something I wanted to show you a long time ago, but I didn't know if I should. After what happened with the HOA, I've been thinking about that, about why I was so ready to fight. And I realized something. The reason I could be so sure that I was in the right wasn't just because of Eleanor. It was because I knew the truth about this car, and I knew that truth would matter." He pulled out a photograph. It was old, faded, from the late 1960s. It showed the same Corvette, but in a completely different context. It was parked outside what looked like a civil rights march, a specific march that Patricia recognized, immediately because she'd seen documentary footage of it in history class. "This is the 1968 Memphis March," Marcus said quietly. "Eleanor took this car to Martin Luther King Jr.'s memorial service. She drove it down to Memphis with her college roommate because her roommate had been part of organizing the student contingent. The car, this specific car, was part of the transportation network that moved activists and protesters to the march. It's documented. It's in the historical records of the National Civil Rights Museum." Patricia stared at the photograph. "Eleanor was from a wealthy family," Marcus continued. "Her parents didn't approve of her involvement in civil rights activism. They certainly didn't approve of her using the family car, which her father had bought her as a graduation gift, to participate in what they saw as dangerous radicalism. But she did it anyway. She used this car for something that mattered. For justice, he pulled out more documents. Official historical documentation, photographs, affidavits from the other activists who had been present. Margaret, another woman from Eleanor's college contingent, had written a lengthy account of how Eleanor's car had been used to transport 3 injured protesters to the hospital after a confrontation with police. The car became a historical landmark, Marcus said, because Eleanor was a woman of conscience, because she used what she had to help others, even when it was costly, even when it was dangerous. When I restored this car after she died, I did it as a tribute to that part of her, to who she was, to who she wanted to be. And you never told anyone, Patricia said slowly. Not the HOA, not the neighborhood. Not in the documentation you sent to the preservation office, not in any interview. No, Marcus agreed. I didn't. Why not? Patricia asked. Because it wasn't necessary to save the car, Marcus said. And because I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that if I made this about Eleanor's history, about civil rights and activism and justice, people would focus on that instead of on Eleanor herself. That she'd become an abstraction, a historical figure, instead of the woman I loved who was brave enough to do difficult things. Marcus closed the folder and set it on Patricia's coffee table. But I've been thinking about what happened with you, and with the neighborhood, and I realized something. The reason I was so ready to fight wasn't just to protect Eleanor's memory. It was because I realized that what you were doing, what you represented, was exactly what we fought against. It was the insistence that conformity matters more than people, that aesthetics matter more than substance, that rules matter more than compassion. I wasn't a racist HOA president, Patricia said, trying to understand. No, Marcus agreed. But you were a person who had decided what was right without trying to understand what mattered to other people. Eleanor fought against that same impulse her whole life. Not in an HOA context, obviously, but it's the same fundamental thing. It's the belief that your vision of the world is more important than anyone else's reality. Patricia sat with this for a long time. I didn't know, she finally said, about Eleanor, about the historical significance. If I had known, you would have what? Marcus asked, not unkindly. Accepted my initial notification instead of having Karen fail to process it? Change your behavior if you understood the real reason I wanted to keep the car? Only respected my property if I could justify it through historical significance? Patricia opened her mouth, closed it. Opened it again. I should have respected your property and your wishes regardless, she said finally. Regardless of the reason. That was what I should have done. Yes, Marcus said. It was. He stood to leave and Patricia walked him to the door. At the threshold, he turned back. I'm not telling you this to make you feel worse, he said. I'm telling you this because I think you're the kind of person who can actually learn from what happened. And I think Eleanor would have wanted someone else to know that her car, her choice, her courage, was part of something bigger. Something that still matters. After he left, Patricia sat alone in her living room and searched the National Civil Rights Museum archives online. She found Eleanor Webb's name in a list of volunteers and supporters. A brief biography mentioned her involvement in the Memphis March and noted her car as part of the Volunteer Transportation Network. There was a paragraph about her death in 2020 and a note that the car had been preserved as a historical artifact in her memory. Eleanor Webb, a woman Patricia had never met, a woman who had lived a life of quiet courage and conviction, whose car, which she'd cherished, had nearly been destroyed because of Patricia's absolute certainty that her vision of the neighborhood was more important than anyone's personal history. Patricia looked at her architectural awards, all carefully displayed around the room, all carefully curated evidence of her achievement and control. She looked at her awards for Best Managed Community and Architectural Excellence and Community Standards Leadership. For the first time, these accolades didn't feel like proof of her competence. They felt like evidence of her fundamental misunderstanding of what community actually meant. It took Patricia 2 months to resign from every HOA-related board and committee she was involved with. It took her 3 months to begin volunteering at the local historical society. It took her 6 months to visit Eleanor Webb's grave and leave flowers, roses, because something about Eleanor's courage suggested she would have liked roses, and it took her a full year before she could drive down Birch Lane without feeling a stab of shame.